Edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
But there comes a time when any public servant should step aside and invite new leadership. Though I am still blessed with full energy to go forward, the reality is that I have reached, quote, my age of retirement.
That was Jake Pickle, announcing his retirement last month after serving in the United States House of Representatives for 30 years. During that time, Pickle earned a reputation for being a consensus builder on the national scene, while also taking care of the home folks. He's perhaps best known nationally for his work on the Social Security front. He was instrumental in getting the Social Security reform package of 1983 passed. He was a prime mover of the pension reform plan of 1987 that helped put the nation's pension plans back on their feet. On the home front, Pickle has helped bring the world of high tech along with its jobs to the Austin area as a congressman. And he's been responsible for helping pump untold millions of dollars into Travis County. Today, we will talk to him about his accomplishments as well as some of the goals he still has in this last year in office. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. And today we are indeed privileged to have Congressman Jake Pickle with us, and to, especially at this time, Congressman Pickle, to have you reflect with us a little bit about your forthcoming retirement. What brought you to that decision?
Well, I think that every person ought to know when to step aside and to invite new leadership. I've served in this job now for over 30 years, and I'm proud of it, and I'm happy of it. I respect the office, and I just think a person ought to finally say, I've served my time.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm feeling good and have no big problems, I thought I'd just turn it in.
Mm-hmm. That is a good time to make the decision.
I'm happy with the decision, but I will miss it because I've enjoyed it.
Oh, yes. Well, I think that you've become something of an institution in the Austin area over the last 3 decades. And today we'd like to just have the opportunity to have you reflect with us about what you feel particularly good about in terms of that time of service. As you look back over all that time, what would you highlight?
Well, there's a lot of glamour and a lot of excitement about serving as congressman. Most of it, though, is just hard work. That's what the public doesn't see. You have to be prepared nationally to cope with the issues of the day and make your district fit into the national scene. On the other hand, a great part of your responsibility is trying to represent the people back home who have problems with their government. I'm very proud of what we've done nationally, but I'm also equally proud of the instances, thousands of them, thousands over the district, where we have helped people who've had a problem with their government, and when they get to one of those kind of problems, they usually go to their congressman and say, can you help me? The fact that my office has been able to help, I think, means a lot.
So it's a source of real satisfaction that you've been available to individuals as well as addressing the global issues.
Absolutely.
I'd like to go back with you just for a moment to the origins of your service in Congress. I understand you had friendship with Lyndon Johnson at the time that you made that decision, and how that came about.
Well, as a young man, I was associated with then Congressman Lyndon Johnson. My friend John Connolly had helped get some of us in to know then Congressman Johnson, and I was involved in every campaign that he ever had, actively, professionally. I served a short time on his staff in Washington back in early 1942 until the Navy caught me. So I lay claim to being one of the original Johnson boys, and very proud of it, because I learned what hard work and dedication really meant and the responsibility you carry with it. So those were my origins, my background. But when you go to the Congress, you realize all at once that there's a lot of hard work to it, and you've got to represent all the people. When you take that oath of office, I swear it, you represent the rich and the poor, the black and the white, all the ethnic groups,
and a lot of
parties.
Unglamorous work that goes with it.
That's right.
And I think it sounds like you learned a good bit in terms of what it meant to be a congressman by working for then Congressman Johnson.
I think in connection with that, you have to recognize your background. I grew up in a little small town in West Texas, Big Spring. My father, my brother, and I, we all went to the Baptist church, and my dog Rex. My mother and 3 sisters, we all went to the Methodist church. And they always fussed because the Baptists always stayed late. There was always somebody evangelizing, praying longer than they should. And my mother and the sisters had to wait outside the church for us to come pick them up. We had just one car. But I learned, I think, in those days to distinguish what was right, what was correct, what was fair, what was just in all your dealings. And I think everybody probably goes through that kind of a background. That was my background as an individual, and I came to the university, and I think I've always kept that kind of principle because of my parents.
So you're really going back to the origins of your commitment to public service in terms of that integrity.
That's correct.
And I think that as you come forward into that, since you started serving in Congress, how has your faith made a difference in regard to that service?
Well, I think every time you get ready to vote, you have to ask yourself, is this the right thing? That doesn't always exist if it's a matter of appropriation. It's a matter of dollars and how you fit into the budget. But quite often you have to ask yourself, what is fair? What is right? Now, you have to play politics in the sense that you know that you're a Democrat and you're a Republican. You know what the parties stand for, and you want to go along with your party. But there'll come a time when you do not agree with that, and you will just you will vote differently. It may not be a party matter. It may be your own individual vote. In 1964, I voted for the Civil Rights Act, the accommodation bill. That was not a popular vote by any means.
I see.
It was a ugly sort of a mood then. But it was the right thing to do, and it proved to be so absolutely correct. Now, a person can't always do that. He's got to recognize he's from a certain district. And no matter what his faith is, let's say this last vote we had on NAFTA, a person who was elected by working men and women in the union area, he knew the union was strong against NAFTA, and they had raised money for him. He pretty much had to kind of listen to what his leaders and his friends had done. It would have been political suicide for a lot of those men to have voted for NAFTA.
Sure.
You come to a point, though, where you just have to make a choice. Now, you may always want to do right, and there's a nagging feeling within you that you ought to always recognize. Vote for what's right. But a person who does that all the time is not going to be around very long, because his district is not going to put up with it. So you've got to have enough of a feel to know when you can part with your district and when you can part with your party and when you vote the way you think. It's a combination. I used to tell a young man to LBJ when he called, I said, now, Congressman and then Senator, you ought to vote this. This is what you ought to say. And he'd always brush his aside and said, listen, let me tell you, I can't be a statesman until I'm elected. That gets to be a practical aspect.
Sure.
But each member, I think, has to weigh his values, what he believes in, what he thinks is right. I think the average member does that, and that's why this country just keeps moving forward, keeps getting better and stronger.
And you've had to make some tough decisions in recent days in Congress that were not always that popular.
That's right, and we've got some tough ones coming up.
Yeah.
But I think the nation moves forward by the feeling of individual men and women that they think this is right. We have our welfare bills now that's very distasteful to a lot of people. And yet, somehow or another, you've got to try to take care of the people. You've got to try to recognize that they're human beings and how is best to handle it.
Well, I think that one of the things that would be interesting to our viewers, and the fact that you've had so much to do with the Social Security system, that's not just past history. I mean, that's history in the making, too. And, for instance, the reduction of not so much the reduction of benefits, but the raising of the age is something that I've heard you make reference to.
Well, we had a serious problem in '83 because the Social Security Trust Fund was going broke. In a few months, we would not have had enough money to pay full benefits.
Just 10
had
years
to
ago.
change it. We had no choice. We had to come together, and we did it by clearing out some of the welfare aspects of Social Security, by raising the rates, by extending the the age from 65 to 67. Under the present law, you don't get full benefits until you get 67, starting in the year 2000. And then we just had to make some other changes. Now, we did the right thing. We've got surplus in the Social Security fund now. But in another 15, 20 years, the surplus we got is going to go down, and we're going to be paying out more than we'll be taking in. So in 15, 20 years now, we've got to make some changes. I've introduced a bill to raise the age, eventually, from 67 to 70. I noticed Secretary Benson, I still call him Senator, observed this week that we ought to give some consideration to that. Eventually that'll do it. The main thing is, though, that trust fund money are there for the payment of benefits. It's the best safety valve against depression and for maintaining humans' being dignity of any of the program I think that we have in operation today. And I'm proud to have had a part of it.
Well, I think that during the second half of the show, we'll come back to more of the goals that you have during this last year of service.
Good.
But there's one other thing I'd like to ask about the last 30 years. And that is that you had indicated before we began our discussion about being party to the prayer breakfast that is held each year. Tell us just a bit about that.
Well, each Thursday, a lot of people don't know this. They think we're a bunch of wild congressmen up there. Each Thursday morning in the House, we have the House prayer breakfast. About 40 or 50 men and women just show up, just members only. We have no guests. We talk about each individual, his background, his faith, his principles, how he had operated his life, what changed him, and what influence the Almighty had in his or his family's life. What changed him, what directed him into a field of service such as a congressman. And it's extremely interesting because each one of those individuals got a specifically different life. They weren't all raised by under a cloud of sweet perfume. It was been a rough life for a lot of them. Now we get to know the members, and they get to tell us what is their faith, what is their beliefs, and we learn to understand them and to love them.
Right. It serves as a support group, I would think.
Absolutely. They're just like all the rest of us. We've all had our problems, and they share that with us. That's why we have no guests. We're just talking among each other. And every time we hear one of our members talk about his background, it makes a deep impression on us, and we want to just appreciate them all the more.
Right, right. Well, I think that that's one of the things that's an inspiration to those of us that didn't necessarily know about that, is that behind the scenes, you've got ways of helping each other as colleagues, and that you're not just adversaries.
Helping and understanding, and understanding what is their faith. Because each one of us have to have a certain faith to go forward in this field of work.
Well, that's a very helpful witness to have you share with us at this
Yes,
moment. We're going to pause here just for a moment to have a word about Austin Metropolitan Ministries, but stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
I don't think too long. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue. Today we're having a discussion with Congressman Jake Pickle. Just soon after he announced his retirement, and looking ahead now to the year that you're going to be continuing to represent this congressional district, Congressman. And let's just think for a moment. A year from now, you will have retired, and what would you like to have accomplished by that time?
Well, within the next 12 months, we have several issues that I think of national importance. Number one, I'm trying to help bring about some reforms in the pension program. We have a lot of pensions, private pension plans, that are underfunded. By the very biggest companies in America, One corporation is $24 billion behind, underfunded. Another one, $15 billion. We can't permit that because there's not enough money in our pension benefit guaranteed corporation to take care of an emergency if we had a depression. We've got to change it. So my intent is to try to bolster the law where a corporation cannot promise more in benefits under a pension or labor negotiation than the company is willing to put up money, cash or collateral for. In other words, if you want to make promises, you're going to increase their wages and give them more health benefits, you got to put up the money for it. That has not been required, and as a consequence, the indebtedness has grown up, and we've simply got to change the unfunded liability because we have over $50 billion of unfundability now. That's one program.
Okay, and do you think there's a good chance that that has a chance to pass?
Yes. Now, we may not get all I want, and the Education Labor may try to slow it down so we won't do it, but the Department of Labor, Secretary of Rights, has indicated that this is a serious problem. We might as well meet it when we don't have a crisis and do it now. We didn't think we had a crisis in the savings and loan program, but we sure did. And then we had to create the RTC, which was absolutely necessary to bail out this mistake.
Sure.
I'm trying to prevent that. I mentioned earlier on the program that we're going to try to keep people in the workforce longer. When they get out at an early age, 62 or even lower, they'll take a penalty, but they get that money. Too many of them are doing that, and a lot of the drain is on a trust fund. We've got to encourage people to work longer because the age of longevity now, the average age for retirement, is upward of 76 years. So I think we probably ought to raise that to keep people in the workforce longer. We have a bill now in the field of charitable organizations, the tax-exempt groups.
Okay.
Hospitals, churches, TV evangelists, all those who hold basically a 501c3 charter designation from the Internal Revenue Service.
And what's the issue there with them?
The issue is, one, if a nonprofit creates another corporation that's for profit, he ought to pay some tax on it. We have not been successful in that. I have a bill now pending, though, in the area of what we call inurement. That is, when an individual or the top corporation officers, the insiders, get more money than what reasonably ought to be given under a charity, the question is, what is a fair amount? We've got some hospitals whose CEOs getting $500,000, $600,000. We've got foundations the same way. We've got some of the TV ministers are all at once blossom into an airplane, have an airplane and a beach home and a mountain home, and you say, did the Lord give them all that all at once? You have to ask you, what is fair? We're going to approach the question of inurement and say what is reasonable in the eyes of IRS and try to set up a standard. Now, the Treasury has agreed to do that. So in both pension and we hope in Social Security and in the tax-exempt organization, we have a general understanding with the administration that we can pass some of those laws.
Okay.
Those are just a few of the things we have pending.
And one of the things that you just mentioned was that where you have a nonprofit, whether it's a religious or televangelist or hospital or whatever, that suddenly becomes a profit maker in one way or the other, that those funds should be taxable.
The law, the unrelated business income tax, the law says that if you make profit on as a side, a subsidiary, you pay profit on it.
So that's already the law.
That's the law.
But what needs to be done now?
They don't enforce it.
Oh.
It's difficult to enforce, and no charity, not many charities in the country, are willing to pay any EBIT tax. We were not successful 3 years ago on that approach, and I don't know whether we can get agreement of the... It's very difficult to administer, frustrating and difficult, but the question of inurement, what the individual gets paid for, when it's all outlined. Some people have on a national board, on 501c3, there won't be but 8 or 9 of them on the whole board. And yet some of them get paid upwards of $1 million when they meet once or twice a year. Now, you have to ask yourself, is that fair?
Sure.
Is that right? And of course, I think that isn't right, and we've got to try to straighten it up.
And I think one of the things that complicates it is that people can say, well, you got a relationship of church and the state ought not to be interfering into religious matters.
We don't interfere with that. There are 350,000 churches in America, and they're not taxed. They're not brought under the tax code at all. If they are a church, and they are a church, they're not involved. There is a complete separation of church and state. But if that church forms a 501c3 and sets up a charity separate and apart, then they could be taxed.
I heard of one church in Ohio that had a girdle factory and was making some big money on that, and it doesn't seem fair.
What is their theme song? Blessed be the ties that bind?
Or how firm a foundation, or whatever.
Well, these are frustrating issues.
Well, sure.
Money laundering is another type of thing. But there are issues that are on the front burner this next year, and I'm anxious to get with it.
Okay. Well, I think, too, that one of the things that I sense that you have brought to the job, and we certainly hope that your successor, whoever that may be, could continue to do so, is a feel for people. And a feel probably for your colleagues. I can remember it's said that in older days, senators or representatives of opposite parties could just debate and fight like cats and dogs on the floor, but they'd walk out with their arm around each other. And it seems like that the atmosphere in D.C. has changed, that people are more acrimonious and personal in their attacks and this sort of thing.
That's been a new development. I think it's sort of temporary. I hope it is. We do debate issues, and we'll get violently worked up on the floor. But when we go off the floor into the cloakroom, we can put our arms around each other and laugh and say, well, you said this, and that was a little strong. But we try to forgive and forget, because to be an adversary is one thing, but to be personal and to be just confrontational, no matter what I want to say. I noticed our president now being described in very terrible language, in my judgment, that he has socialistic tendencies. I hate to see that type of thing being advanced, because we're all trying to do the best job as possible. I think that that's a temporary confrontational attitude. You don't have to oppose everything administration recommends. Now, the NAFTA issue is a good issue. The president formed a good coalition, Democrat and Republican.
Right.
We worked together closely, and we passed an important bill, and we never would have done it had we not been able to work together as Democrats and Republicans. I hope we can have more of that and less of the bitter.
Right. You know, it's just incredible to an outsider looking at Washington last year. The year starts with, I guess for the first time ever, all the members of one party voting against, in that case, the tax budget issue. But by the end of the year, you had the best example of cooperative bipartisan efforts since World War II, all in 1 year. And you were part of that.
I think that's the way it ought to be worked, and I feel good about it, particularly when you win. But if you lose, our democratic system now allows for dissension, allows for debate, and nobody's protected. You've got to defend yourself, and sometimes it's rough and tumble. But I think that's a good system. Now, if you just don't get personal about it, we'll work right well. Usually we do not, because that member knows if he's calling somebody a name, that member can call him a name, and pretty soon you get to the public nothing but just a cat and dog fight. That's not good for our country.
Poisons the atmosphere generally if that happens.
Oh, yes.
Well, I think you've modeled for us that ability to disagree agreeably, and to look for consensus, and to look for bipartisanship, and to assume that the people of the other party have as much interest in the well-being of the country as your party does. And so whoever replaces you, we would hope that for them.
Well, that will happen. The people somehow or another make the right choice in the long run.
Right.
And any person who thinks, well, he's done a great job and there'll never be another job like this, all he's got is wait. We got a rule up in the Congress that you're good for about 3 years. The first year, people said, yes, I remember when he served. The second year, they say, now, what was he elected? And the third year, said, I can't remember that fellow. What did he do? So you've got to recognize that the democracy rolls on, and it ought to.
And I wonder, too, I mean, you're finishing 30 years, and you see so many of these folks that come along, and they get elected just a time or two, and then they burn out, and they say, we've got to bail out of here. It's just too much. What's making for that difference?
Oh, you have to go back and be accountable to your district, But you've also got to be honest with the folks and about your position and about your vote. You got to have a sense of humor about all of this too, and not take it too seriously. I had one, if I've got time, I had one member from Georgia voted against the Desert Storm. And he went back to his redneck district in Georgia, and he knew he was going to have big trouble. And he had a big town hall meeting, and he said they came in, scowled in his face, and the first question he had from the group was, why did you vote against Desert Storm, vote against your president? And he had said, well, that bothered me. That was a tough issue. And I thought about it, and I thought about it. But finally I asked myself, what would Jesus do? How would he vote? And he said, all at once, the people in the crowd kind of stopped and didn't know how to answer it, and he went on to another subject. Which means to me that when you raise that shield, what's right and what's wrong, even out of context, people stop and think. And they'll give you then a sense, a right to choose what you think is right and what's wrong. And that's what keeps this country strong. And it'll keep that way too, because we're a better nation than we were 50, 75 years ago. We're better educationally, morally, welfare, business-wise. We're doing better. We've got a real problem in the area of deficit, and it's got to be met. The first issue next session, going to consume us all for all year long, will be the health issue. Now, can we, as rich as we are, as good as we are, strong as we are, can we fashion a new health delivery system? That's going to be the challenge we face next year. It will not be easy because we have the divisions so strong in this country. The doctors, the hospitals, the pharmaceuticals, the insurance people, they're all very strong. And reaching consensus is going to be very difficult. I don't think we're going to be able to do it without the leadership of the president.
All right.
He's given that leadership. Now, I don't know whether we can make it or not, but we should try.
Going to really try for it, and I think that your being there to represent us in that very difficult issue will be a blessing to us here on the home front. And we want to thank you, Congressman Pickle, for sharing this time with us and for sharing 30 years of service with us. We'd like to thank you folks for looking in today and sharing this time with Congressman Jake Pickle, and invite you to come back for our next edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson, and peace be with you.
Call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.